Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. This is Millward Brown's webinar on the AdReaction video, Creative in a Digital World study. My name is Sarah Beatty, I'm Marketing Director with Millward Brown, and with me on the line today is Jolene McGoldrick, our VP of Insights at Millward Brown Digital. Today we're going to take you through our most recent AdReaction thought leadership, which was just released last month, mid-October, and has already generated a great amount of interest in the market and among our clients. So we're really excited that you're able to join us today. In terms of agenda, I'm going to provide a little bit of context and background around our AdReaction research. I'm then going to turn it over to Jolene, who's going to take us through the regional U.S. findings, and then we're going to open it up to questions at the end. You can submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation using the questions box on the right-hand side of the GoToMeeting interface, and we will address your questions at the end. So first up, just a little bit of context around AdReaction before we dive into the specific U.S. findings. Our proprietary AdReaction studies have been conducted since 2001, delivering insights on consumers' perceptions of advertising, particularly digital formats. So in the past, we've focused on receptivity towards mobile advertising, social media, and many of you have may have joined us last year when we talked about multi-screening behaviors. So building off of the multi-screen phenomenon, which we're currently in, we designed our AdReaction video study around how audiences consume video specifically across devices, and then ultimately the role of video content and advertising. And so by conducting this research across the globe, we're able to get a rich understanding of the differences in video consumptions across regions, and then ultimately tease out some learnings which are not only interesting for all of us, but extremely valuable for our global clients. As you can see here on the map, the survey was conducted in 42 countries. Those are indicated in the light green color, and additionally, parallel copy testing was done in 8 of those countries, and those are noted here on the map in the dark green. In the U.S., we also incorporated a couple of additional data sources to build out our story around video, and Jolene is going to take us through the U.S. methodology as well as the findings around video specifically to the U.S. market. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jolene.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. So I'll start with talking about the U.S. methodology. So we leveraged 4 different data sources for this report. The first one, which we'll talk about in the beginning, is a survey that we conducted. We conducted it among 1,000 multi-screen users, ages 16 to 45, and we're defining multi-screen users as those people who have access to a TV and also have a smartphone or tablet. The next data stream we used was copy testing. So we did copy testing across platforms to tease out the strengths and weaknesses both of creative and platforms in dealing with multi-screen video across these platforms. The next data stream we looked at was desktop and mobile clickstream data. We analyzed this from the Compete panel, and we did this to really understand the categories of YouTube videos watched on desktop and laptop versus on mobile. And then the final piece is really to add some description and bring some of this to life. We did 60 video chats that were facilitated by Firefly and Millward Brown around 2 key questions about video consumption that we'll talk about. So the way this report breaks down is really into 4 sections that I'm going to cover today. We're going to start with talking about people. So making sure you're getting the right person. We're going to look at behaviors and we're going to look at minutes. But in deep diving in the U.S., but with a global context, and we'll look at this across age and gender as well. The next thing we want to layer into this is the context. So what do people think about ads on different video ads on different screens? How's TV different from mobile? And then which ad formats are audiences the most and least receptive to? Finally, we'll talk about content. So what is it that marketers need to deliver in content that makes the video content compelling enough that audiences will either click on it or not skip on it at all? And then we'll wrap up with what we think the implications are for marketers, both in terms of the content that they create and then in terms of an overall multi-screen strategy that really embraces video. So let's get right into it. Let's start by talking about the right person. So before we can really talk about how much time audiences spend watching video, it's important to look at how much time audiences spend across all of the different screens in their life so that we can understand the role or the proportion of time that video plays into this. So what we see in conducting the survey this year is that audiences are spending about 130 minutes a day, just over 2 hours, accessing the internet or apps on their smartphone, about 42 minutes a day accessing the internet or apps on their tablet, about 63 minutes a day accessing the internet on their computers, which are referring to laptops and PCs, and then about 128 minutes a day watching TV. What you'll see is that there's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between the overall time spent and the spend, and there's many reasons for that, some of which will come up in the context of this report. So when we break down screen time, now we're still on screen time, we're not talking about video time yet, but when we're talking about how demographically audiences are splitting their time, all of their time across screens, what we see is that for younger audiences, and this is intuitive, right? This is just adding a number to an intuition, I think. Younger audiences are spending the most time on smartphones, 147 minutes a day, about 2 hours and 27 minutes. Second being 25 to 34-year-olds, that older slice of millennials is spending just over 2 hours a day on smartphones. And then the younger Gen X demographic is spending about 118 minutes a day accessing the internet or the mobile web on smartphones. We see in terms of computer usage, that's really highest among the 25 to 34-year-old demographic, as is tablet consumption. And then really the connection to video comes in TV. So if we just look at the time spent watching the TV screen, audiences are roughly equivalent. All of them spend about just over 2 hours a day watching the TV screen. But what we see now is that TV and video have more than just one meaning, right? There are many different meanings, many different inputs, and can be viewed on many different screens, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So now if we break this down and we look at TV as not just a screen, but as live TV, right, and on-demand TV, including those things like Netflix and Hulu, as well as the YouTube content that you might watch on your television, we see that TV time is roughly half of it is spent watching live TV, and half of it is spent watching on-demand TV. Audiences spend about 20% of their time on, so they spend about 20 minutes of their time on computers watching videos, about 17 minutes a day watching videos on their tablet, and about 36 minutes a day watching videos on their smartphone. So if we look at how this relates globally, right, we studied, as Sarah mentioned before, we studied 42 countries. And when we look at that globally, the first question that audiences are always interested in is, what does this mean for the U.S., right? How do we compare to all 42 of the other countries that you've seen? Because the scope of this is so big, we cannot even try to fit all the data on one page. And what you'll notice is that the U.S., we're not even on the first page at all, right? We actually rank 22nd in terms of overall video consumption with our 202 minutes per day. Globally, the average is about 204, right? So we're right on par with the global average. We see the largest amount of time spent watching video is in Nigeria, where they watch 272 minutes of video per day. And then if you look at the bars there, what that's showing you is share. So of the 272 minutes a day that Nigerians are watching video, 39% of that video consumption is happening on live TV. Live TV has the biggest shares in Nigeria, Thailand, Argentina, and France. What the U.S. is first in is the amount of on-demand TV we watch. We watch the largest share of on-demand TV in line with Sweden, and part of this is because just the on-demand TV platforms are more mature in the U.S. We index lower in terms of the overall the amount of video that we watch on computers, slightly just below 1 minute below the global average in terms of the amount of time we watch video on tablets, and about 4% below the global average in terms of the share we watch video we watch on smartphones. So you can see really we're right in the middle in terms of global video consumption. So now when we look at the U.S. and we look at the amount of video that different demographics are watching, we see here that the differences between live TV and on-demand TV really start to take shape. So when we start again looking at our youngest audience, the 16 to 24-year-old audience, remember 18 to 24 is young millennials, and then 16 to 18 would be older Gen Z. What we see is that for this demographic, they're actually spending about 77 minutes watching on-demand TV and only 53 minutes watching live TV. For that next age group up, the 25 to 34-year-olds, it's roughly even. They're watching 63 minutes of live TV and 66 minutes of on-demand TV. But then for the 35 to 45-year-old demographic, they're watching about 20 minutes more per day of live TV, right? 73 minutes than they are of on-demand TV. The other differences we notice in here are in terms of videos, watching video on computers. We see that 16 to 24-year-olds watch the most video on computers as well as the most video on smartphones. They watch about 49 minutes a day of video on smartphones and 21 minutes of video a day on tablet. And so what these things all show us, right, is the degree to which younger audiences are just becoming much more video-centric in terms of how we want to think about communicating with them. When we break it down looking at it by gender, what we see is that generally video consumption is roughly the same for men and women across computers, smartphones, and tablets. But the biggest distinction we see is on-demand TV. We see that women watch about 20 minutes more a day of on-demand TV than men do, and men watch about 4 minutes more a day of live TV than women do. And part of this difference, we think, is really due to this phenomena of binge watching. So binge watching, defined really as watching multiple episodes of the same program in a sitting, is much more a female phenomena than it is a male phenomena. So 32% of our female respondents had watched multiple episodes of the same program yesterday, compared to only 17% of men. We also see there's a little bit of a relationship of binge watching with age. So among 16 to 24-year-olds, 30% of them binged watched a show yesterday. 27% of 25 to 34-year-olds did, but only 15% of 35 to 45-year-olds did. Right? And so what all of these numbers show us is that the habits are changing. And when we look at the qualitative responses, that change comes out too. So if you look at the difference between the top and the bottom, I think that's really emblematic of the quantitative results we see in the study. So if we look at those bottom responses, we see that there are still people who really do love their shows on TV. And there still absolutely is a place for live TV. When we look at those top responses, we also see that audiences love the flexibility and the choice that comes with addressable, more digital formats. So what this really shows us is that digital is really transforming what video means. It's transforming what television means. What we also see that's equally interesting is that video is really changing what it means for audiences to interact with and engage with digital as well. What do I mean by that? So if we look at the amount of time that's spent per device, so we talked about device time in the beginning, how many minutes audiences spend a day on devices, right, accessing the internet, accessing apps. So that's the number in the denominator, right? The number in the numerator is the amount of time that they spend watching video. So what we see is that 31% of time on computers is now spent watching video. 28% of time on smartphones is spent watching video. 41% of time on tablets is spent watching video. And this really just underscores the imperative to really understand and get video right. And this difference is only more prominent when we look at it by age. So when we look at the youngest audiences, we see that almost half of their time on computers is spent watching video, a third of their time on smartphones is spent watching video, and 64% of time, 2/3 of their time on laptops and PCs is watching video. And then this goes down by age. So now, switching gears, and what this also tells us is that, so if it's the case that that video is changing how we engage with digital, right? We want to start thinking about how. And one of the biggest changes that we see is really in terms of using video as a means of exploration, and then the potential for marketers, right, using video as a means of recommendation as well. And so when we talk to our qualitative respondents about, the interesting ways in which they were using video, they talked about things like watching YouTube unboxing videos or reading reviews that way, getting their information not just by reading it, but by experiencing it through videos. So beginning to just switch gears and talking about the mindset, right? So what's important when we're understanding cross-device video consumption is that it's not monolithic. So a few years ago, there existed the sentiment that if you had a really good video ad, you could maybe start it on TV and then push it down to what we're seeing as the lesser digital formats, right? A great TV ad should do well anywhere. But as we really get into looking at consumption, looking at all of the details of consumption, and then what that ultimately means for a mindset, what we see is that it's not the case that a video ad will perform the same across all different formats. And we'll get to some of those recommendations when we talk about the copy testing section. So one of the things we did to build to this was to really look at all 5 of these ways in which people are consuming, audiences are consuming video, and look at who are they watching video with, where are they watching video, and then what's their mindset that they're watching video. And so what we see is that for your larger TV screens, and I think this is intuitive, those tend to be the more social screens. So audiences are watching live TV and on-demand TV with other people that they live with. Computers is a mixed bag. Sometimes they're watching it on their own, and sometimes they're watching with people they live with. And then intuitively, tablets and smartphones, and I think luckily for all of us who have tried to lean over someone's shoulder and watch a smartphone video, those are used more on one's own in a solitary way. And then intuitively, again, we see that for the larger screens, those are most often used at home. For computer video, it's most often used at work. Yes, people do watch videos at work. And then for tablet and smartphone, those are the on-the-go video consumption. And so then how that ladders up to mindset, we see that for TV, right, for live TV, there's a mixture of boredom in that mindset, but for TV overall, it's a relaxed mindset. And the same is true for consumption on tablets and smartphones. I think what's most interesting about this is looking at the different mindset for computers. So there'd be a tendency in seeing these numbers to think, wow, what is the role of video? Is there a role for video in terms of computers or laptops, PC? But what we see is that the mindset is so different on computers. It's so much more goal-oriented that we can think of lots of forms of advertising where in particular you're asking someone to do something, you're asking someone to research something that actually might be most compatible with being run on laptops and PCs or computers. And then in terms of how audiences are making choices about what types of content they want to watch on what screen, to answer this question, we utilized the Compete Clickstream data that we get. And what we saw is, again, intuitive, but this will give you a little bit more detail behind it, is that for the lower touch videos we watch, so those funny animal videos that some of us watch maybe even at work, right, or the how-to, the entertainment videos, quick tutorials, people blogs, those things, audiences tend to skew more mobile they tend to go to their mobile device to watch those types of videos, but the longer form or heavier content, things like films and animation, science and technology, gaming, even sports, audiences tend to prefer watching those types of things on their desktop, laptop. So now transitioning, so we've started talking about what are the characteristics of how people watch video, and we're going to move to talking about what the formats are that audiences prefer. But in that space in between, we know, especially for digital formats, is the space of targeting, right? Making sure that the right content and the right format get to the right people. So one of the things we thought was really important to ask in making this connection was asking audiences what their opinions about targeting are. And what we found, I think, is one of the more interesting things in this study, which is that audiences really prefer, I would almost call it aspirational targeting. They want to be targeted on the way they see themselves, their interests, their passions, their hobbies, the brands that they like, right? Instead, what they're often targeted on are the things that they really don't like to be targeted on. Things like their shopping history, their online search history, their web browsing history. So we see for being targeted on interests, right, it's a net positive. 43% of audiences are positive about this type of targeting. Only 21% of audiences are negative towards this type of trends you like or follow. 38% of audiences are positive towards this type of targeting. Only 23% are negative towards this type of targeting. But the sort of easier, the more blunt instrument type of targeting that is often done, Like, what's in your shopping cart? Let me target you on that. Let me target you on the last sites that you've visited. Audiences, when you ask them about this in the qualitative responses, they talk about this creepiness factor, right? That they feel watched, that they feel monitored, that they feel that their privacy has been invaded when it comes out that you bought this, now I show you ad for this. You've been here, now I show you ad for this. And so I think the imperative in this is really when we're thinking about the type of targeting that we use, using more sophisticated targeting than just targeting based on search history or web browsing or online shopping history, which audiences tend to perceive very negatively. So now moving on to talking about formats specifically in the context in which ads can be shown. We want to start by looking at receptivity. So what are the types of formats? So one of the really classic parts of AdReaction is that we track receptivity towards different ad formats over time, and we've been doing this since 2001. And generally, what we've always seen is that the story is good for more traditional formats like live TV, like print, but then as we get into digital formats, it starts to change, and it always becomes like all of the air leaves the room, and that for digital formats, there's these really low positive and high negative numbers. We're starting to see a change in that. You won't see it on this slide, but if you stick with me a few more slides, you'll see exactly what I mean. So for live TV, 27% of audiences are positive towards advertising on live TV. 30% of audiences are negative towards it, but it's the least negative when we just look at this at an overall screen level. The positivity, the favorability or positivity really starts to drop once we get to on-demand TV. Only 19% of audiences are favorable about have a positive opinion or a favorable opinion about advertising on on-demand TV, and then 15% for computers, 16% for tablets, and 18% for smartphones. So if we just left it here, we might think, wow, this is still another bad story for digital advertising. But I think what becomes really interesting is when we start to break down, what are the drivers of a positive or negative mindset about this certain type of advertising, we see that there's really two things that are influencing how audiences feel about their ad experience. And those two things are their mindset and then the level of control that they feel that they have over that particular format. So when we look at the mindset, we've talked about this. For the computer mindset, we know that there's a very lean forward mindset. Audiences are very active, they're goal oriented, and for live TV, it's the opposite. Right? And then when we plot this against control, we see that what audiences have, for computers, they have this expectation that they should have high control over their advertising. And I think the most classic way to think about this is that audiences have internalized the pop-up. So when you imagine getting a pop-up on your screen, your mind immediately turns to where is the X and how can I close out of it? And because of that, there's this feeling of high control, whereas just the opposite happens with live TV. You know that there is pretty much no chance that if you're just watching a regular live TV that you can in the moment skip that ad. And so it's inevitable that the commercial is going to air to its completion and you'll watch it. And then digital formats fall somewhere in between. So we see that control is becomes this essential thing. When we look at just how control relates to receptivity, it starts to be clear to us that there's really two things that are driving receptivity or favorability towards advertising. One is control, right? That audiences want some modicum of control in terms of their ad experience. And then two is really reciprocity. And we've seen this for the past 3 studies we've done. So when we started studying mobile probably about 4 years ago, one of the things that really came up was that this feeling that audiences had that particularly on mobile, that advertisers were essentially borrowing their data, their battery, their screen time, their minutes to show audiences their ads. And there was this feeling that the scale was tipped in favor of advertisers, and that was something that really enraged audiences. So what we see is that when there's a degree of reciprocity added into this, and one of the ways, I think that one of the most sort of blunt ways in which reciprocity is added is in mobile app rewards, that it starts to equalize out that feeling of balance between advertiser and audience. And so audiences are very positive towards mobile app rewards. 54% have a positive opinion, only 18% have a negative opinion. So that's the first thing, is really reciprocity. The second thing that really comes out is this control, right? We see just how important control is. So to really underscore that point, rather than starting with looking at the positive numbers for control, let's start with looking at the negative numbers. So when we start to look at the formats where there is no audience control over their advertising experience, social, autoplay, pre-roll that's not skippable, mobile app pop-ups that are not skippable, what we see is that audiences are overwhelmingly negative to those formats of advertising. Only 14% of audiences are positive towards in-banner autoplay. Only 15% of audiences are positive towards social autoplay. Contrast that with adding in this element of control, right, in the form of skippability. So when we add control back in and we give audiences the opportunity to skip, we see that it changes. And not only does it change in terms of it's more positive than non-skippable formats, but those favorability numbers actually beat TV for the first time in which we've ever studied this. So 44% of audiences have favorable opinions of skippable pre-roll, as opposed to 27% of TV overall. 41% of audiences have positive opinions of skippable mobile pop-ups, and even 32% of audiences have positive opinions of social click-to-play. So what this is really showing us is we're thinking about developing video products and developing video campaigns. Vesting some control within the audience can give us a lot more baseline receptivity to the advertising even before we start looking at content. Now when we transition to content and we start to talk about what are the types of things, what are the types of content that audiences really want to see in advertising, the thing that really jumps out to us is it really comes back to, again, I mentioned control and reciprocity, is this idea of reciprocity. And we talk about mobile app rewards being this very blunt, tangible form of reciprocity. But what we see with some of these native formats is that they're more subtle forms of reciprocity, right? That the audience is giving their attention, but in return, they're getting information. So when we look at tutorials, we see that, for example, more than half of audiences notice when a video ad has a tutorial in it, and 71% are receptive towards them. 61% of audiences are receptive to video advertising, including user reviews, and 58% are receptive to video advertising that includes product reviews. So this idea of reciprocity, or some give and take between audience and advertiser, becomes another essential element of video advertising. This shows up more prominently by gender, particularly when we look at reviews. Males tend to favor reviews even more than women. And then I think very interestingly, there's a relationship here with age. So I mentioned that, one of the challenges we always have is that digital formats have lower receptivity than traditional formats. Another challenge that we've dealt with every year that we've studied this is that younger audiences always tend to be slightly more favorable or receptive to advertising formats than older audiences are. And we get the question, right, is it possible to advertise to older audiences on digital, or is digital really just a channel for young audiences? But I think when we look at these more native formats like user reviews, product reviews, and tutorials, what we see here is these are particular tactics that work very well for that older demographic, the 35 to 45-year-old group, because it's, again, this sense of give and take between the advertiser and the viewer. So now, continuing in that vein, I want to talk more about content. And I want to use, for the most part, I'm going to draw on the copy testing that we did for the portion of this study. So as I mentioned, we did parallel copy testing for 20 different ads in 8 different countries. And we tested these ads across TV, online video, and then mobile video formats. And so all the results you're seeing are based on interviews with more than 10,000 consumers. And we were able to leverage, we have a proprietary solution called Link Now for this that we leverage on the Zappy Store platform that's giving us the results of all of these findings. So what did we see? Well, I think what this shows us here is just the imperative to really get video right in every frame of the video. So we know intuitively that audiences skip our videos, but I think what this shows us, right, when we do these copy tests, we get both an attitudinal component to it, but also a behavioral component. How long are audiences looking at the ad? When do they skip? What portion of the ad do they see? And what this really shows us is just how quickly audiences abandon the video, right? Right from the first few seconds, there is a steep attrition curve into audiences skipping it. And when we look at the duration, so after 10 seconds, we see that slightly less than 30% of audiences are still watching this video. So for the majority of people, we really need to capture their attention and convey the essence of what we want to in the video between 0 and 10 seconds, because as soon as they can orient and find that skip button, we risk losing them to being able to skip away. And so I know a natural sort of retort to seeing this slide would be, so yes, that's the case, but many video formats are designed that you don't have to pay unless they, you don't have to pay for that impression unless the audience watches it all the way through. But how we see it, it's really more, it's just as much about effectiveness as it is about efficiency. So yes, it may be the case that you do not pay for that one impression because someone has skipped too soon, but many more things go into a video than just the paid media that you put behind it. So it's a lost opportunity there. So what is it really that we have to do or that we have to bring to advertising for audiences not to skip it? When we ask audiences this, it really corroborates what we saw in the targeting, right? There's really this relationship between targeting and content that comes out here. So the first thing, and this is particularly more prominent in the US, is videos that are funny or humorous. Audiences are more likely to stay on those types of ads longer. The theme of reciprocity comes back in videos where you get something in return. Audiences are more likely to stay there longer, pay attention, and not skip. But then it gets really into those more targeting-esque things. It's for a brand that I'm interested in. It's for a character I'm interested in. It's for a person that I'm interested in. And so that tells us that this really correct targeting doesn't just matter for overall receptivity towards the ads. It can actually have the potential to make audiences stay and pay attention to the ad longer. So ads really need to focus on this concept of skip resistance. So given that we know audiences are going to skip away, right, we have to deliver something funny, something interesting, something unique. And what these two ads show you here, the ad for IGA, which was an Australian ad, and the ad for Nestle, which was also an Australian ad, is that these ads were more skip resistant because in the first few frames of the ad, they were able to establish a storyline enough that audiences stuck with them and watched the video more through just because they were so strong in the very beginning of the ad. So when we looked at that retention curve also we see, so one is building skip resistance in the first few frames, but then the second part of that is really also considering length. So many times we're testing 15 and 30-second ads. When we look at that retention curve, that almost feels aspirational because most of what's happening has to happen in that first 10 seconds. So if your goal is to tell a story, rather than having a 30-second story that people are only watching part of the story, 10 seconds of, does it perhaps make more sense to actually condense that story into a 10-second video clip and then maybe sequence the availability of that story across multiple videos? So these two examples, the Maggie example from Germany and the Purina example from the US, were both examples of where the advertisers were able to take that story or narrative and condense it into a shorter amount of time, which gave them two things. One, more people finished the ad, but two, also more people actually got the essence of what it was that they were trying to communicate rather than just a partial essence of what they were trying to communicate. So we talked about skippable ads, right, that start on their own, like pre-roll, but we also have this other genre of ads which are more like click-to-play ads. So the Facebook click-to-play ad is a great example of that. And the hard reality is that if given the choice, audiences, and again, this is intuitive, but I think that this chart really shows you sort of the intensity, like in the scope of this. So given the choice, audiences are not going to click-to-play advertising. And so, yes, maybe it is true, again, that you are not paying for those ads that audiences don't click on. But again, this is about impact, right, and effectiveness, not just about efficiency. And so even in this copy test, we saw that when presented with a click-to-play ad, only about 10% of audiences clicked on that ad, and that would be much less in the real-world environment. So what this means is that in designing our video creative, that first frame really becomes essential for two reasons. So the first frame is essential because it's what has to entice audiences to want to click. It's that promise that if you click this, you will be rewarded, right, with a rich story, with entertainment, with something humorous, with something evocative. And these are two examples that did that really well that we tested in this campaign. The first was an example that was done in the UK for Heineken, Open Your City, and then the second was an ad that we tested for HP US. And both of these ads were really able to garner a lot more clicks than the majority of ads that we tested. The other thing that these two shots show you also is that they're well branded, and this is in this case due to the format more. But audiences are often only watching a few, just the first frame of an ad. So it's essential that even if they don't click, that there's some branding value within there. And so just to sort of wrap up that point, when you look at what is it that makes this video advertising likable, it really comes down to a few of these key concepts we talked about. Interest, really being able to match the interest of the audience to the underlying ad you're showing. A great example of this is one of our qualitative respondents talked about a basketball ad, right? I'm a basketball player, I'm a basketball fan, and I got this ad, so I didn't skip it, right? We're matching up interest with advertising, and it's making people stay longer. L'Oreal is another example. We know that they do a great job on tutorials with this idea of reciprocity, but they also have ads that they use with reward advertising that's perceived effectively. And then when we talk about sort of more of those creative qualities, the method cleaner example, right, which they highlight the concepts of funniness, usefulness, utility, and really sequencing a story over multiple videos to do this. And then finally, just how important it is. So in the beginning we talked about a little bit about how digital is changing video, but when we really think about how video is changing digital also, what we know is that there is a raised bar in terms of the visual imagery and the visual appeal that needs to be brought. This is particularly true in video, right? If we go back to those last two frames when we looked at Heineken and HP, what those two ads have in common, one of the things they have in common is it's a beautiful first shot, and that audiences really are looking for that and expecting that. So a lackluster or a visually not compelling shot is going to matter both in terms of how they receive the overall ad, but in terms of also in terms of how likely they are to engage with it. And then tailoring the context of the ad. So this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, right? This idea that if we have a good ad, can we just push it out to all of these formats? And what we saw from testing this Geico ad, which was an ad we tested in the US, is that ads don't always perform the same. So this, in this instance, this was a digital ad, and it's a quirky digital ad, and it did very well in the digital environments. But when we tested this ad on TV, it didn't do so well. Audiences didn't appreciate it in the same type of way. And then the final concept in terms of creative concepts I want to just talk about in terms of looking at different screens. And this is somewhat intuitive, really thinking about how much we can display, right? If it's imperative that we display the brand, how much else can we display? And really making sure that we're considering screen size in terms of how we visually lay out the ad. So here's an example for Germany Vanish. So if the ad's running on a mobile phone with a small screen, maybe the only thing you can do in a single frame is to really give a nice and compelling product shot. But if you have a larger format to run it in, then it doesn't need to take up as large an amount of the screen. So wrapping up, in terms of what all of this shows us about creative considerations, there's really 6 things we ought to be thinking about. The first is engagement. How do you optimize your ad across all screens to most engage your audience? The second is how you factor in skippability and autoplay, knowing that audiences will skip if given the chance, right? Building in things like humor and interest as a means to prevent skipping. How you handle click-to-play, really making it all about the impact of that first frame as a means to entice the audience and also as a means to get some branding value out of that solitary frame. Keeping your ads shorter so you can make sure that you can deliver the message as intended, making sure that the ads can brand effectively so that even if audiences don't watch an ad all the way through, there's still branding value in those frames that they do watch. And then sizing. And those are the creative considerations to really take into account when thinking about the plan for video. So what are the implications of this? We think, again, coming back to how we organized this report, that the implications really fall into 3 areas. And the first area is the right person, really targeting audiences appropriately, moving beyond TV, realizing that audiences are diversified in their video consumption, and finding the role of each of those screens. It's not as simple as, go mobile for younger audiences and go TV for older audiences. What this really shows us is that each can have a really interesting role to play, and so this idea of sequencing, or how we tell a story across screens, becomes more important. Finding the right context, so assuming some resistance to advertising, but really embracing these concepts of control and reciprocity between advertiser and audience. And then finally, delivering the right content, working with the skip and adapting across screens. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sarah, who's going to talk for just a few minutes about some of the other resources we have. So the deck that I presented is just a very small amount of the overall resources that are available. We have an interactive deliverable and a few other resources that Sarah's going to talk about now. So Sarah?
Thanks so much, Jolene. So as Jolene just mentioned, all of the country level data is available to you now at millwardbrown.com/AdReaction. So this is an online interactive tool which enables you to really drill down into specific country results by the various data sets that we include. And you can toggle across countries for a comparison as well. It also provides quick links to download the global report and additional assets such as our infographic and animated video. So it's a really great resource. We encourage you to visit millwardbrown.com and take a few minutes to go through that interface. Also, if you found this topic relevant and you're interested in learning more about video creative, we have a library of public thought leadership also on millwardbrown.com/insights. This includes a variety of POVs related to video, such as how do I use online video effectively in my campaign? We have another POV that discusses the impact of humor in making ads effective. And then we also have some published reports, such as from 6 seconds to 6 minutes, exploring the impact of video ads, both short and long format. So there's a lot of information on millwardbrown.com. And all of this published learning is based on our creative development and in-market media and digital effectiveness solutions, which help brands optimize marketing performance across media channels. So just a few to mention here in terms of our relevant solutions. Link Now is part of our full Link for Digital portfolio of creative copy testing solutions, and it is used to determine if online ads are strong enough to run and what really is driving performance when it comes to creative. And the great thing about Link Now is it's a quick solution. It's available in as few as 6 hours. And really, when we look at the relevance to this content of what we're talking about today, we know that pre-testing creative before campaign launch, it can be hugely helpful and can shed light into how ads should be adapted across the various screens on which they're going to be seen. So specifically, Link for Digital, we can test video creative for online, mobile, and Facebook. And also with Link for Digital, it can be run in parallel to Link for TV studies to help marketers adapt their creative across screens. So once the digital video creative has been finalized, it's really important for us to quantify the in-market impact of your campaigns, specifically on brand metrics such as awareness, message association, favorability, purchase intent, and that's where Brand Lift Insights comes in. This is really the best solution for marketers who want to understand how their video creative, in the context of your media buys, are changing consumers' perceptions of your brand. Digitally, an in-market solution is cross-media. This is an ideal solution in cases where you're really looking to evaluate the branding impact of your cross-platform campaigns. So we can measure all types of media, paid and earned media, and insights from cross-media enable you to develop more effective and efficient campaigns moving forward. And then lastly, we know that successful video advertising is not only influencing our consumers' attitudes towards a brand, but it's ideally triggering future actions. And so by measuring online behaviors alongside attitudes, marketers can quantify how shifts in brand lead to actual changes in the lower funnel activities. So that's really where consumer behavior insight solutions comes in. It's a great complement to the attitudinal measurement from Brand Lift Insights to understand how consumers interact with brands online. So we're looking, in this case, we're looking at view through, search activity, site visitation, and we're looking at ultimately how their behaviors are shifting after being exposed to digital advertising. So while I've gone through these pretty quickly, but we're only highlighting a few here on the screen. We would love the opportunity to come in and discuss any of your measurement challenges and needs around video to find a solution that might fit best for you. And so with that, we will go ahead and turn it over to questions. And I'm just going to pull up, we've got a number of questions here, so I'm going to moderate us through this. First off, I just wanted to confirm that we've got a number of questions about following up with the deck after this, and we will be following up with all of the attendees with a link to the recording for today's webinar, as well as access to the full US report, which Jolene just took you through. So let's also, let me just pull up a couple of these questions. All right, so we have a question about, Jolene, I'll just read this to you. So how can we tell the difference between a passion/interest and their web history/patterns? Time spent with topic times searched. What will determine a passion or an interest?
I think that's a great question, and I think this is somewhat, unfortunately, I think this is one of these things where there's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but what we see in general is it's this idea of really having multiple sources of things going into that. So, for example, if I'm someone who likes cooking, right, I want to be able to use multiple sources. So I might use website visitation if I visited certain cooking sites, right? But I want to make it clear in my content that I'm not necessarily basing the advertising just on their visit to foodtv.com. I want to make it more about just a general interest in cooking in general. So really pulling from multiple streams. I think what that slide showed, right, is that when you start to blend those different screens, search history, web history, other types of things like brand response that you can blend together, that's the type of targeting that audiences want to see, rather than just basing the targeting on a single thread, pulling those threads together more and basing the targeting on that.
Great, thanks so much, Jolene. Also, can you clarify, we have a question about, does on-demand television include DVR recordings?
It does. Mm-hmm.
Great. Also, back to the targeting slide, what is your view on retargeting?
Right, so I think that goes back to, Sarah, that what we just talked about before is that I think part of what we see with retargeting, even though it can be very effective, is that audiences really do feel like in that moment, and they've cited it quite frequently in the qualitative, that they feel as if someone is, looking over their shoulder as they use that. So again, with retargeting, it's not necessarily a one-to-one, because oftentimes the things you're being retargeted on are things you've often bought, but it's being able to take that purchase history, link it with other variables as well, and target based on that rather than just solely basing it on what is in the shopping cart or what's been purchased.
Great, thanks, Jolene. We have a question about multi-screening. So do we know how devices are being used at the same time? For example, watching TV and using smartphone or tablet at the same time?
We didn't look at that in the context of this study, but the report that we ran last year that's available on our website will give more detail on that also. And what it does talk about is, and I think this is a shift away slightly, but what we see is it's very common for a smartphone or even a tablet or computer to be used as a means to kill time, either when TV commercials are being shown or also even during the TV content itself becomes not interesting. We definitely see audiences reaching for laptops or smartphones until something interesting reappears again. And what we see in terms of content is in those instances they're generally going for more short form content, just things that are bite-sized content that will last long enough until the content becomes interesting on the first screen again.
Great, thanks so much. We have a number of good questions coming in. Let's shift over a little bit to the creative aspect. So what types of ads would be better shown on a computer versus being shown on a tablet or a smartphone?
Right, that's a great question. I think in general what we see is, we see that in this study, and it's also corroborated by the Getting Audiences Right study that we released in January, is that for particular verticals that really demand a degree of fact-finding, that really require that audiences don't just either purchase later or go offline to purchase. So I'm thinking of things like financial services, pharmaceuticals, right? That those type of things, even some consumer electronics that are bigger ticket items, where you are comparing prices, right? Where you're understanding if it's a product that works for you, where you're understanding the fine print, that it's easier to advertise those types of things on computers, right, and have audiences follow through on the same screen than it is to often advertise that on a mobile screen, which requires that audiences for their fact-finding then will move to a laptop or PC to do that fact-finding. It's easier just to keep the entire interaction on the computer.
Great. So also on the creative aspect, do we have any research? Do you have any research best practices or personal experience, Jolene, with some of the work that you've done around best practices for autoplay social ads?
For autoplay social ads. It's a great question. I'm just thinking here for a moment in terms of best practices. Well, I mean, I think that the first thing we see is that autoplay, just to set the table on this, is that if we're talking about autoplay, there's really two kinds of autoplay social ads. So if we're talking about something like a Facebook autoplay ad, one of the things is accepting, I'd say that the biggest best practice we see is accepting the reality that these ads will often be viewed while the sound is muted. So being able to have a full video ad that doesn't include sound. And so we're starting to see some advertisers really doing a good job of this. So for example, if there's dialogue, captioning that dialogue below. Right, those type of things, acknowledging that the ad experience is one that often is without sound, is probably the single biggest thing. If we were to take out the social element of that and just talk more about an in-banner autoplay, I think this one can be even actually a little bit more challenging, because what we see is that, we see this more from behavioral things, is that those types of ads can actually be pretty disconcerting to audiences because the sound is coming from one place and they might be looking somewhere totally different. And so what we would say on those types of things is really finding a way to consolidate it such that the sound won't play unless the ad is actually in view, which is often not the case.
Great, thanks so much, Jolene. Also, here's a quick question about Vines. How do Vines fit into this? How do audiences perceive advertisements on Vines?
That's a great question. So we've done some other research on this also. So just to make sure we're all using the same terminology here, Vines are generally one form of micro videos which we can have, and we refer to micro videos as those videos that are under 8 seconds. So for many people, when you look at a micro video, you have a moment where, because the ad happens so quickly, you think, what was that I just saw, right? Is it a GIF? Is it a video? But we've tested this against other types of formats, and then what we see is Vines are really a very organic social form of ad, and we know that advertisers also, want to get into this space. But for advertisers, I think what we're seeing as a best practice is audiences are very aware of authenticity in micro videos, and also in some other forms of videos posted on social channels, particularly some ads that are more native being posted on YouTube, is that audiences do a very good job about sort of sniffing out authenticity. And so authenticity becomes really important. So when you test ads, for example, you might see an ad for an advertiser. You might see 2 ads for the same advertiser. One that's created by someone who's a fan of the brand, and one that's created by the advertiser themselves. And it seems to be the case that that organic content, when it's actually being created by a fan of the brand, those ads do better than the more produced ad. So my advice on Vines is more thinking about Vines as not necessarily creating Vines, but really curating Vines, and using Vines as an opportunity to have a dialogue with audiences, to allow audiences to shoot that. And this applies to a few other forms of video also, to allow audiences to shoot them and then to pick the best of those rather than trying to shoehorn a lot of content into the small format.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jolene, and thanks to everyone for your questions. We did receive a number of additional questions that, as we start to run out of time, I think would be best addressed directly. So we will be following up. We'll follow up with those of you who have submitted some specific questions about the data. And again, as a reminder, we will follow up with attendees for a list of the recording, a link to the recording, and access point to the U.S. report. So with that, I just wanted to thank everybody for your time today. Again, thank you to Jolene, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. You can reach out to us at digitalsolutions@millwardbrown.com. And with that, we will wrap up, and thanks so much to everybody for joining. Have a great day.